Welcome to World Talk Brace.
Today, we're scanning the globe to bring you clarity on the latest developments. We'll be looking at some escalating regional conflicts, major geopolitical moves, and seeing how domestic politics are sending waves across the world. We'll also dive into some really important stories about justice and finish up with some fascinating things happening in science and culture. Okay, let's get right into it.
We begin with a look at some of the world's most active flashpoints and security situations, starting in Pakistan. So, in Pakistan's Balochistan province, we've just witnessed a massive military operation against separatist rebels. And the result? 177 militants killed in just 48 hours. Now, this isn't just another skirmish. This is the highest death toll from an operation like this in decades. It really signals a dangerous new phase in a long-running conflict. So, what's actually driving all this? Well, at its core, it's a fight for regional autonomy and control over the area's resources. But you really have to pay attention to the tactical shift happening here, the use of female suicide bombers. That is an incredibly rare and frankly desperate tactic. It tells you just how intense and high stakes this conflict has become for everybody involved. It's the kind of development that could really destabilize the entire region. Okay, now let's shift our focus to the Middle East. The Rafah crossing, that critical lifeline between Egypt and Gaza, has been partially reopened by Israel after being closed for a long time. But, and this is a big but, this is just a very limited pilot program. It's only allowing some aid and a small number of medical patients to get through. But here's where the story gets a little more complicated. The new Israeli border site that's controlling this access point has been named Regavim. Now, why does that name matter? Well, Regavim also happens to be the name of a very prominent right-wing Israeli movement that pushes for expanding settlements. For a lot of people watching this, that's no coincidence. It's being seen as a pretty clear political signal about Israel's long-term intentions for the territory. At the exact same time, the situation inside Iran is becoming more and more volatile. A series of completely unexplained explosions have rocked cities in the south. Now, Tehran's official line is that they're just gas leaks and they're denying all the rumors that a top military commander was assassinated. But, these incidents are stoking serious fears of either internal sabotage or maybe even external attacks, which just adds another layer of tension to an already tense region. Our last stop in this section is a terrible tragedy out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Over 200 miners are feared dead after a coltan mine collapsed. Now, coltan is a mineral that's absolutely essential for our smartphones and all sorts of electronics, which makes it incredibly valuable. The government is placing the blame for this disaster on the instability created by the M23 rebel group, which controls this resource-rich area and is backed by Rwanda. It's just a brutal reminder of how our global demand for technology can be directly tied to regional conflict and human tragedy. Of course, none of these regional conflicts are happening in a bubble, so now let's pull back the lens a bit and look at the bigger geopolitical chess game, the shifting alliances that are shaping all these events. And you really can't see this tension any clearer than in the messaging between the US and Iran. I mean, look at this. You've got these two completely opposite statements. You have former President Trump suggesting, hey, we'll make a deal. And then you have Iran's supreme leader warning that any US strike will ignite a massive regional war. It's this wild mix of diplomatic olive branches and military threats that makes the whole situation so dangerously unpredictable. And this isn't just a war of words either. It is escalating into direct diplomatic action. In a major retaliatory move, Iran has now officially labeled European armies as terrorist groups. This is a direct response to the EU designating Iran's powerful Revolutionary Guard Corps the exact same way. It's a classic diplomatic tit-for-tat that just pushes the two sides even further apart. Meanwhile, China is playing a really complex game on the world stage. On one hand, it's strengthening its alliance with Russia, especially when it comes to Taiwan. But at the same time, it's patching things up with the UK. But honestly, the most shocking story might be what's happening internally. A massive military purge is apparently underway, and it's allegedly because of just staggering levels of corruption. Leaked reports are claiming that some of China's ballistic missiles were discovered to be filled with water instead of fuel. I mean, if that's true, it raises some really serious questions about the actual readiness of its military. So, to counter China's growing influence, the AUKUS Security Pact between Australia, the UK, and the US remains a cornerstone of Western strategy in the Indo-Pacific. The main goal here is to equip Australia with nuclear-powered submarines, which is a huge technological and military commitment designed to project power all across the region. And the scale of this commitment, it's just staggering. Just look at this number, $368 billion. That's the estimated price tag. So this isn't just about submarines. This is a multi-generational investment that fundamentally changes the military balance in the Indo-Pacific. It forces every other country in the region to completely rethink their own strategic plans. Okay, so from the grand stage of global strategy, let's now shift our focus to some key domestic political developments that are definitely making waves internationally. So let's zoom into domestic politics for a minute, because what happens inside a country can have huge global ripples. In the US, a local election in Texas is actually making national headlines. Democrats just pulled off a surprise victory in a staunchly Republican area. So why? Well, some analysts think it was a backlash from the rapidly growing Indian American community against some of the anti-Indian rhetoric coming from certain political factions. It's a really good example of how demographic shifts and diaspora politics are becoming this really powerful force in Western elections. And speaking of those US-India connections, former President Trump has once again brought up his plan to build a massive triumphal arch in Washington, D.C. What's really notable is his direct comparison to the famous India Gate in New Delhi, promising that his will be the biggest one of all. It's just another example of how India is increasingly becoming a part of American political conversations, for better or for worse. All right, moving away from politics, several stories this week are really highlighting issues of justice and their profound personal human impact. This next story, it honestly reads like something out of a spy thriller, but it's a very real court case from the UK. So, there's this YouTuber living in London who made videos mocking the Saudi government. As this timeline shows, his phone was then hacked with some really sophisticated spyware, and later he was physically assaulted on a London street. Now, a British court has handed down a landmark ruling. It found the Saudi state was directly responsible for these attacks. And that ruling came with a pretty hefty price tag. The court awarded the victim $4.1 million in damages. This isn't really about the money, though. It's about the powerful legal precedent it sets. It sends a very clear message that there are severe financial and legal consequences for governments who try to silence dissidents on foreign soil. And finally, in the UK, a major political scandal seems to be brewing. Newly released documents have uncovered some very troubling connections between Lord Peter Mandelson, who's a huge figure in British politics, and the late Jeffrey Epstein. The files show a $75,000 payment from Epstein to Mandelson, and they even suggest that sensitive government emails might have been shared. As you can imagine, these revelations have triggered calls for a full, formal investigation into their relationship. And to finish up, let's turn to some really interesting developments in culture, science, and the environment. Okay, this next story feels like something straight out of an old fairy tale. It's like modern-day alchemy. A man in China has gone viral after he successfully extracted 191 grams of pure gold, worth over $20,000, from a pile of old, discarded SIM cards and other electronic waste. As the slide breaks down, it's a super complex process of dissolving and isolating the precious metal. But, and this is a really big but, before you try this at home, he gives a very serious warning. The chemicals involved are incredibly dangerous. And we're going to end today with this just incredible image. A powerful, record-breaking polar vortex has brought such extreme cold to North America that it has almost completely frozen Niagara Falls. This really rare natural event has transformed one of the world's most powerful waterfalls into a surreal frozen sculpture, and it's attracting huge crowds of tourists who are willing to brave the bitter cold just to see it. So, from simmering geopolitical tensions and domestic political shifts to absolutely stunning acts of nature, these are the stories shaping our world. Subscribe to World Talk Brief for more clear, thoughtful explanations. World Talk Brief, news explained without the noise.